All right, welcome. So I was asked in the comment section of the last video. Um, Ido Sherman was one of the commentators, and he had mentioned that he liked some of the changes, but he was wondering how I planned to deal with Hull Breacher and Opposition Agent. I'm running them, of course. I think they're pretty backbreaking, and his point was basically that in the last game, it was clear my opponent got a permanent into play that functioned like a opposition agent, essentially preventing me from searching. It was the Planeswalker, and it was a real problem for me. So he was curious how I would address that. And his suggestion was Fatal Push, I think. Actually, Fatal Push is a pretty good idea. So it may make the cut just because of the utility of it. Of course, you do need push and fetch land or something. If the opponent flashes in like an opposition agent, you would have to have basically a sacrifice effect ready to go, if I recall correctly. So if I'm gonna remind myself, I actually don't know that I own a Fatal Push. Actually, do not. So if I take a look at it, yeah, mana cost 2 or less. You need Revolt in order to kill these. So it's a decent idea, but it doesn't have the ability to, of course, kill the creatures all the time. But it is cheap, and that's good. And it's flexible in the sense of, you know, you're more than happy to kill a first turn Bird of Paradise or something like that. So, or a Dark Confidant who you don't need Revolt for. I may end up making that adjustment, but for now, what I decided to do was something a little bit different for a couple of reasons, and I've been pretty happy with. That's strange. I've been pretty happy with how it's been working, but I will need to get some more challenging matches to see and to also measure what I think about the Fatal Push idea, as well as some of the other ideas I've kicked around, like the Witchcraft Talisman. So the changes I've made now are a little bit weird, but interesting to me. So what I decided to do is I decided that I wanted removal, but I wanted counter spells. So ideally, I can just counter Opposition Agent or Hull Breacher when it's coming down. But if I can't counter them, then I want to be able to get them off the board. And I wanted to be able to do it even if I top decked the answer card that I'm adding to the deck. Like if, say, Hull Breacher's in play and I'm sitting here holding Brainstorm that I can't cast, and I top deck, boom, whatever one of these cards is that I put into the deck, I want to be able to deal with the Hull Breacher on the spot. So I kind of wanted cards that were both counter and removal. And as it turns out, as I was looking, I found a number of options. Now, there is one card like that I'm not using, and it's kind of glaring in the fact that in its omission. And perhaps I will add it. In fact, there are two. There's Cryptic Command is not currently in the deck, and Mystic Confluence, the 5 mana that bounces up to 3 cards and you draw some cards, also not in the deck. So Confluence felt a little bit too expensive for a 3. You know, you're trying to deal with 3 casting cost cards with a 5 casting cost card. It's not great. In Cryptic, yeah, Cryptic feels pretty good, except I don't know what I would cut for it, because what I already cut was tough enough. So what I ended up cutting was I cut, at least for now, I cut Dark Confidant because I wanted to add a commit to memory, and so over Cryptic. Looking at commit as the 4 mana solution, the counterspell / get the thing off the board card. I like commit a little bit better because, you know, bouncing a card sometimes isn't as good as commit. Putting it into their library a couple of cards deep. Imagine like Cryptic Command on a Soul Ring that's in play, for example, is pretty useless, but end of turn commit on a Soul Ring is great. The other thing is commit will actually, because it puts target spell or an online permanent in, it will deal with cards that can't be countered. So it can actually put a card that says can't be countered into their library, and since you're not countering it, you're putting it in. It will actually address those cards, which is cool. But more importantly, the reason I really wanted the card was also it's easier to cast than Cryptic by far, right? 1 blue versus 3. That's certainly a factor here. But most importantly of all, I thought it was really interesting that it comes with the memory attachment onto it, because I have Hull Breacher in here, and the ability to Time Twister when you have Hull Breacher in your deck is pretty dang good, like game-winningly good. So if you happen to get Hull Breacher out, this card single-handedly, while providing all of the other things that I wanted out of the slot, also gives me a way to just win the game on the spot. Because if you flashback memory, if you aftermath memory rather for Hull Breacher, you've got it. I mean, it's definitely over. You draw 7 cards and you get 7 mana of any color, and your opponent's mind twisted. Pretty darn good. It also gives you the ability to, like, let's say the opponent starts out with some really nasty discard early. They duress, Thoughtseize, him you, and they take like Helm of Obedience, and maybe even they take the commit to memory. Unless they exile your graveyard or you play Rest in Peace first, the memory being in the graveyard means that you can still put your combo back together. So that's pretty good. Or like, let's say they hit your Necropotence. Well, memory gives you a way to get it back in the deck so you can attack with the Zur, put it into play, and win the game, right? So I really liked having that sort of fail-safe built in. Now, I just mentioned Rest in Peace. It clearly is not great with Rest in Peace. But the idea here is it's still a counterspell, essentially, or Vindicate at instant speed when you have Rest in Peace in play. And most of the time if you have Rest in Peace in play, you're well on your way to winning the game anyway, so you're probably totally fine losing the memory side of the commit to memory. So we're not putting it in here for the memory. That's just a bonus that comes stapled on that gives us another win condition or a way to recover from a really bad spot. Like if somebody does hit you with a nasty Mind Twist and they hit this card, you can just, as long as you have 6 mana, you can just reload your hand and continue about your game. So really good stuff there. So I like that. So that was one of them. However, this card is a CMC 10, and I really don't want to be Dark Confidanting a commit to memory and doming myself for 10. Hitting like the fairies and stuff is already bad enough. This would be super terrible. In a deck with Necropotence, Dark Confidant is a little bit, it's good early for, you know, getting extra mana for like playing low land count in your deck. But it might be better off, if I really need an effect like that, it might be better off that I just played like Night's Whisper, something cheap, get a few extra cards into my hand so I can keep hitting those early land drops. It could also be the Wishclaw Talisman spot that I was thinking of, but I don't think that running Commit to Memory and Dark Confidant already really sketchy with the Necropotence plan. It just seemed like too much. So that was where I made that cut. The other one was Stoneforge and Sword of Feast and Famine. I love Stoneforge, Sword of Feast and Famine, especially in a deck with Winter Orb. But I do agree that without having all Brea's little tokens and stuff, you don't necessarily have enough creatures in here to run like multiple pieces of equipment. And if you're only going to run one, despite how much I love Sword of Feast and Famine and Winter Orb, Umezawa's Jitte is more important, actually. Because I think it's more important. Because I think that, yes, Sword of Feast and Famine combines with Winter Orb, but a lot of times you have artifact mana, you're going to be fine with the Winter Orb. But Jitte combines with Winter Orb also because it keeps creatures off the board that produce mana and lets them work under the orb, which you don't want them doing. And it allows you to save a lot of your removal. It gives you extra life so that you can draw extra cards with Necro or pay more life with Toxic Deluge and so forth. And like I said, if it has a few counters on it, then opposition agents and things like that are not going to beat you unless they can deal with the Jitte first. For all those reasons, like Jitte is essentially a card that says like creatures no longer do anything in a format that everyone has a special creature in their hand at all times that they want to get into play and do something with. So for that reason alone, just because we're playing Commander, I think Umezawa's Jitte and Vedalken Shackles just kind of need to be in the deck. It's the same reason that Treachery's in the deck. So I'm not going to cut them. Plus, it's a Tezzeret target and a Fabricate target. It makes it just a little bit more valuable as far as removal goes. It allows your artifact search to actually get creature removal, either via Shackles or Jitte, both of which is also really important. So I cut the Stoneforge package because it was a little loose with only 6 or 7 creatures available in the deck. Very good. The other way I thought about doing it with the Stoneforge is that I could have put another piece of equipment in. I could have actually added Batterskull. And then what I'm doing is I'm basically adding in an extra creature who's potentially recursive, a creature that can, eventually you can pick the skull up and replay it, and it's tutorable with Stoneforge, so that you can sort of put together your a life gaining machine for a necro, and also a creature to equip something else onto if you have to. And as cool as that is, it's kind of slow. This deck is trying to just win the game, and didn't make as much sense to me as just having more disruption. The threats are too varied, and you play even if you run out like a workshop into that 4/4, like say you go workshop Crypt Batterskull, and they're doing something like doing a bunch of dark rituals and playing Wheel of Fortune style deck, like a storming, trying to storm off. You're looking at this Batterskull going, geez, I wish this card was anything. Like, I would much rather have a commit to memory or something than freaking Batterskull. So as opposed to going in further that direction, I actually pulled back from it a little bit. So I cut out the Stoneforge, and I cut out the sword, and I cut out the Confidant, and I added commit to memory. I added Dromar's Charm. This is the most questionable of the three, I think. I do like the fact that it's a 3-mana solution to a 3-mana problem. So I don't like the fact that commit is 4 mana and these guys are 3. I like the fact that Dromar's is a 3-mana solution, and it hits these cards on either end. So you can either counter them, or you can just kill them if they're already on the board, because it can give something -2/-2. The ability to gain 5 life is probably never going to come into play, but of course it is something of a draw 5 with Necropotence. I mean, it does give you some life gain in your deck, but that's not really why we're playing it. But the other two effects seem pretty good. It kills like these guys, it kills Dark Confidant, it kills a lot of things that that can be a threat, Priest of Titania and stuff like that. So I don't know, and the fact that it's just a counterspell as well. And because we also have the signets, not Arcane, but the Azorius and the Dimer signet, it can be a lot easier to play this card than it looks. Because if you have one of these guys, you can just filter in and with colorless mana, and then use 1 mana of one of your like islands or whatever, and then pay the cost to play Dromar's Charm. So despite what the casting cost looks like, I think along the lines of commit being you just need 1 blue, and this thing being as weird as it is, I think that it's actually sometimes easier to cast. If you don't have the signets, it can be a little tricky. So I'm still not totally convinced this is correct. Other cards I kicked around were Anguish Unmaking and Recoil. Also 3-mana answers. I still do kind of like having the idea of cheaper answers, because a lot of times when they're flashing out like Opposition Agent is when you have, they've gone first and they have their 3rd land into play, and you have 2 lands into play. One of them's a fetch, and you sack your fetch land. So that's the kind of situation where suddenly the idea of running the Fatal Push would be a lot better. And so like I said, we may end up going that route and getting the Fatal Push in, but for now, like I said, I wanted to have extra counter. So I have Commit, I have Dromar, and then the last one I added was Drown in the Loch. Now, Drown in the Loch's a little bit weird because Drown in the Loch doesn't combine, it doesn't play nice with Rest in Peace. But again, if you're at that point where you're doing the Rest in Peace thing, you're mostly good. It'll still counter 0 drops, so like you can still counter a Crypt or a Mox or whatever, but obviously it's severely nerfed. Of course, you can Force a Will with it because it's blue too. All 3 are blue. That's also a factor. I got extra removal in here that I can Force a Will with or Force a Negation with. But anyway, but man, this card's, I'm really impressed by Drown in the Loch in general. It seems to be pretty nice because of the fact that it can deal with, once again, Opposition Agent or Hull Breacher on either end of the card. It kills or counters anything that has it kills a creature or counters a spell, any spell, not just like negate effects, provided that the CMC of the card is equal to or less than the number of cards in your opponent's graveyard. So that's why it doesn't work very well with Rest in Peace. But what that means is that like there are some really nasty low CMC, high power, high threat creatures, and also cheap commanders. And this thing has the potential to just deal with them as they're playing it or after very cheaply and easily. You can muddle the mixture for it. I kind of like the card. I actually really like the idea of having a card that I can muddle the mixture for that just says kill your creature. And now by running Drown in the Lock, I actually do have that, as opposed to having to do like a complex muddle into Demonic Tutor into Swords of Plowshares type thing. I can just muddle into Drown and just drown the sucker. And it's not going to work all the time. Obviously, if their creature is like gigantic and their graveyard is small or whatever, then it's not that great. But this deck's pretty good at putting cards in your opponent's graveyard. So I think that card might actually end up being a permanent fixture in here. I really like it, but I'll see, because the interaction with Rest in Peace does give me pause, and that may be the reason why it doesn't get retained. But we'll see for now. So those are the changes, and I've got some games for you, but let me know what you think for sure. We'll get started on the games, and I believe... Here we are. Not too many, but I got a handful. Somebody that decided to try their hand at getting a win, and then a few others, a couple of repeats. I think one of them was just like a jump in and concede type situation, but the rest, I believe, were good, and there should be some good games in here. So we'll start with these Red Baron, 14,389 here. Now, as you can see, I haven't been playing a heck of a lot, so I have a low number of results. So this deck is still very new. Zur isn't new, and the overall concept isn't new, but the deck itself, like this configuration, is still somewhat new for me. So I don't know that necessarily this is the best version of the deck that there could be. For example, I have considered I do have that energy field slot that makes you totally immune to damage, and it's pretty good. But it's possible that the card could be something else, like, for example, Legacy's Allure, which also sits in play, and once it gets up to 3 counters or more, becomes a mega problem for Hull Breacher and nonsense as well. And it's tutorable, and you can go get you can just steal a bird with it right away and stuff like that. So the card's really good, Legacy's Allure is, and it might be maybe something that should be played in here, even if it doesn't replace the energy field. But who knows? We're still working on it. All right. At any rate, we're going to get into these games here, though. So, all right. So my opponent's playing Tymna and Akri Lineslinger, and Akri can be... This combination can actually be very scary. It's super aggressive, can deal a ton of damage, and be highly disruptive. So I have, however, a no-brainer keep. I am going second. My opponent leads off with a Mock, so I'm already losing. My opponent gets Akri Lineslinger out, and I draw and get to Imperial Seal and pass. But I really like the way that this hand works, not only because it sequences into... so my opponent ties there just so that they can hit a land drop, I think. So that tells me they're probably weak on lands, but nothing I can do about that just yet. So I'm going to just go ahead and play Urza. Double blockers feels really good here, because now the Tymna just isn't going to get my opponent any cards. I can just block. I make the trade. My opponent swung in there, but I do agree that they did it correctly, because if they let me play even a single artifact, then Tymna can't trade with my artifact creature, and that's even worse for them. So I think it was correct for them to actually attack there, despite the fact that it was bad for them. But not attacking was worse, I think. All right, so now I've just got to... This is part of the reason I really like this hand, though, is because Urza gave me 2 blockers. Opponent tries for a, during my upkeep, unexpectedly absent. Not as exciting as you'd think. He should have waited for me to sack a land, the Flooded Strand, so it'd get shuffled away. I actually was very happy to see that happen, because I got another thing for Urza. Opponent goes for a sword. I just put it back in their hand because of tempo. And fetch, end of turn, looks safe. Everything's looking pretty good here. Fierce Guardianship, excellent card to pull at the moment, but I can't use it yet, because with Urza in play, I'm going to go for the lock piece of Winter Warbler. I get mana, you don't, thanks to Urza's. I think Urza must own the Winter Orb, or created it or something, like, because that's That's just too perfect, right? So nice thing here is that Fierce Guardianship can be cast off Orb, Construct, Tundra. So at this point, I'm in a total dominant position. My opponent just scoops it up and tries again. And obviously, Tezzret's just going to... Oh, sorry. Tezzret's just going to make things worse for my opponent. If he doesn't do anything, I'm just going to get more and more mana further and further ahead. All right, so I've got a risky keep. Once again, I think my opponent's playing the same combo throughout. But this can definitely do some things. And here you can see I have my new tech commit to memory card. Opponent has an insanely fast start. Sundial the Infinite. So I made a major misplay. Do you see it? Did you see it? Hopefully you did. The misplay was that I needed to sack the map in response to the Sundial. This second game here, I'm going to make multiple misplays. So that is the first one. That's the freebie. We'll see if you pick up on the next one. But yeah, I needed to sack in response, because if I don't, my opponent can end the turn with my sacrifice or search effects on the stack. Of course, I realized this as soon as I screwed up, and then I went, oh crap. So I realized this, so I don't, so I sack main phase, but yeah, kind of nasty. Opponent runs out some mana, and yeah, okay, I'm sorry. So I was trying to figure out what happened there. So my opponent gets Tymna and Swiftfoot Boots, but doesn't have the mana to equip it. So on my turn, I get Trinket Mage into Crypt. And then I've got Vampiric Tutor, and this is... I didn't think that... I shouldn't have given my opponent the option. So my opponent plays Acri Lineslinger, equips it, and sends in to get a card off of Tymna. And I Vampiric Tutor, and knowing that they have Sundial, and they choose to end the turn rather than let me Vampiric Tutor. Now, I did prevent my opponent. I traded whatever I would have Vampiric Tutored for. So I traded the ability to, set my deck up for my opponent's ability to draw a card. But in my opinion, that was a huge mistake. Hopefully you picked up on the fact that that was the second error. There was no reason to do that at all. Just let them hit me, Vampiric during upkeep, and then on my turn, I go 3, 4, 5. That's Helm and Activate. 2 and 3. That's Rest in Peace. I can 1 for Vampiric. So I Vampiric during upkeep. 3, 4, 5. Helm them. 3 Rest in Peace them. I literally win the game here. So rather than winning the game, I chose to prevent my opponent from drawing a card. Absolute boneheaded move, and it's makes the rest of this game a lot harder for me. I did not draw a talisman here. Had I drawn a talisman here, there would have been nothing hard about this game. So we're going to bug out. I actually drew Opposition Agent. So this is me flashing Opposition Agent into play. And then my opponent actually has removal for Zur and attacks. And I chump block with Trinket Mage. And shoot. Well, the replay is going to bug out. Because Zur's off the table, I have an Opposition Agent in play, not a Talisman of Progress in hand. But what ends up happening is, at the end of the day, I end up like putting together the Rip Helm combo, and I can't do it. I think I get Zur. Basically, my opponent removes Zur, and I get Zur again, and they remove Zur, and I get Zur again, and then they don't remove Zur, and I attack and play Rest in Peace, and then Helm them out of the game. And then my opponent, on that turn, flashes out the red card that you must control your commander to play. It's like a deflecting swat. So the card that like retargets. So they try to deflecting swat, but Helm of Obedience actually it's target opponent. So there's no one to deflecting swat the helm towards. I can't remember what they ended up using it on something, and I'm like, wait, what? And Helm's still in play, and then I win. I think there somewhere in there I used a commit to memory on something, but like basically that's the sequence of events over the next couple turns. I'm disappointed because I wanted to show that the commit to memory gets used in that game, but actually there's a much better game. Hopefully it doesn't bug out for commit to memory. So that was, I believe, game 2. So we'll move into game 3 here. Sorry, I didn't realize that was actually going to bug, or I might have maybe put together some more videos. But I promise there's some good stuff in here anyway. So I have to mulligan. So I mulligan into this. Hull Breacher seems like it should be good against a Tymna deck, hopefully. Although Acri can kill you with commander damage very quickly, so hard to say. But my opponent's got a really, finally doesn't have like a screaming fast start, and this means that I get a lot of time. So I'm going to just go ahead and get some more land here. I'm being patient with my Mind Twist. I have Fierce Guardianship and Hull Breacher here, so I'm going to go ahead and try to breach some hulls right now and see what happens. It's my opponent's end step. He gets a Savai Triome, and this seems fine for me. I'm not going to attack because I don't want to get condemned. But this does look like a great time to cast Zur. I have Fierce Guardianship after all. So now I've got two problems from my opponent. Might tempt them to use like a 4-mana answer, like a Wrath of God effect, which I can then Fierce Guardianship. Or, you know, if not, okay, they play Tymna. That's all they've got. Excellent. So now we're going to go for the big twist. Patience perseveres. I was hoping, I'm going to pause. I was hoping right there that actually my opponent would put an artifact mana into play, like if they'd played their Great Furnace, because then pre-combat I could attack and copy artifacted, and then I would be able to get the last card out of their hand. Alas, they did not, but you know, I still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana on the disruption there. My opponent was an Artifact Blast. It's amazing. Anyway, so I go get Necro, and we're gonna do Necro things. In fact, what we end up doing is taking 6 cards out of their hand and putting 5 into mine and making it so that they can't draw extra cards. Of course, I'm holding the counterspell as well. They don't know that, but my opponent looks at the situation and wisely concedes and just moves on to game 4. So this opponent has a lot of, you know, Artifact Blast and cards like that, cards that are anti-me, but another somewhat risky keep, but I decide, I don't know, it should be okay. This has got the Mental Misstep from before. I've got 2 mana and a Mana Leak. I mean, I've got Winter Orb. I might be okay. I can stop a Soul Ring, can't stop a Crypt, but maybe I'll be all right. Miss a couple land drops. It's feeling a little tricky here. Of course, I don't play the Orb. What I want to happen is a 3-drop. I counter it with Leak, and then I Orb them. Or I want to find a land. So thankfully I do find a land. That's what happens. So I'm going to pause though. Did you notice something? Did you notice something about what my opponent was doing? It's very conspicuous. I noticed this as we were playing. And hopefully you picked up on what it was. Now, there is no reason when they have black-white and a colorless that they should not against a deck that only has like a wasteland and a land in play. 100% it is correct to play Tymna the Weaver. If they don't, and they leave 1 white untapped, there's probably a reason. So it's probably Enlightened Tutors, Swords to Plowshares, Tithe, or Mana Tithe, which is exactly what my opponent had here. Fortunately, the Mental Misstep I added in the prior to the last video takes care of that. I was banking on them having the Tithe, and they did on. And you know, so I played into it because I knew it'd be fine. And then they have Generous Gift. Doggone it. I didn't even get a card off that, but I did get an Elephant. And they're tapped out. So we're going to get the Winter Orb down and strip mine the land that they untap, and just stall for a little while and hit them in the face with an Elephant. Would have been great if I had been able to bounce that Shroud. But the reason I didn't incidentally bounce with the Fairy was because I didn't bounce with the Fairy because if my opponent's turn was going to be tap 3 or 4 mana and play like their commander and equip it, then on my turn I wanted to be able to bounce it. And of course, I knew that I was planning to Winter Orb, so if they tapped out to do all that and I bounced it, the tempo swing would have been tremendous, probably backbreaking. As it is, I'm still really far ahead. So on my turn, I draw the Gitaxian Probe that I also added, which allows me to understand what's going on over here and play around it. Of course, I'm digging for land. I do find a counter, so that's not the worst. Here you see the forecasting cost on Commit to Memory is not working out for me too well, but we've got other cards in the deck. That's what happens when you play forecasting cost cards sometimes. So the situation's a little bit ugly right now. My opponent's Mox Opal's now on, and their Paradise Mantle is now on. I just tutor for Crypt here because I still have Fierce Guardianship, and I also have Deluge, and that's going to allow me to I can counter this thing, which would have gave their guy flying and allowed him to take cards out of my hand with Spectre Shroud and draw extra cards. A very bad situation, obviously, so we're going to stop that. Mox will pitch away that land there and allow me to Spell Seeker, and then I Spell Seeker for Fragmentize, and I kill their Paradise Mantle, which takes 1 mana away from them, and turns their Mox Opal off, taking another mana away. This is an excellent time to Mind Twist, and I go ahead and take out Hammer, Daretti, Tajnar, Swordsmith. Opponent top decks a Stoneforge Mystic, but goes and gets Ember Cleave. Meanwhile, I'm setting things up over here with a Brainstorm Shuffle type effect, and I end up getting a Mox Opal into play. Opponent does draw a Crypt, which allows them, they now have their Opal active as well, and gives them enough mana to work under the Orb. But what's happening, of course, is that at this point I'm building up enough cards so I'm going to pause right there. What's happening is that I'm building up too many counters, so that my opponent is getting mana, but now they don't have cards. So, you know, I want to stop one or the other, both if I can, but if I can only stop one or the other, you know, stop the mana so they can't play their cards, or stop the cards themselves. And so we've shifted gears slightly from stopping the mana to stop the cards themselves. On that turn, I had a really nice play. I actually attack in, give my opponent the opportunity to trade. If they tried to trade with their guy who had +1 from Spectre Shroud, as soon as they block, I just commit the Shroud away, which would have turned off their Mox Opal and made their guy 2 power and killed it with the Elephant. And if they don't block, then I do what I did, which was Deluge for 2, killing my Spellseeker, but killing both of my opponent's creatures so that he can't use Stoneforge Mystic to cheat this Ember Cleave into play, and it won't trigger the whenever equipment enters the battlefield under your control off of Sigarda's Aid clause. And also, my opponent now has, you know, a Tymna deck with no creatures in play, which is really nice. And I'm sitting on Counterspell plus Force of Will, although I really don't want to Force of Will with Commit to Memory if I can help it, because it's like Force of Willing with a Vindicate or a Counterspell. And you always want to Force of Will with cards like Impulse, not other Counterspells if you can help it. This is kind of the worst thing to Force of Will with is probably Force of Will, actually, but you know, this card would be a little bit less unfair, I guess, or busted, powerful, if it didn't let you Force of Will with other Force of Wills, at least on other formats. But then again, it has another purpose to serve in those formats. Anyway, my opponent, I guess, I don't remember. I think this is a bug turn because they're conceding. I think my opponent ran out 1, 2, 3, 4 and ran out their commander, and I mana drained it, and then that was the spot where they conceded. As on the next turn, I cast Zur, and then from there it was all over. And I mentioned to them that it seemed like they were playing a lot of cards that use the stack, like Mana Tithe and Deflecting Swat and Artifact Blast, which is, you know, counter target artifact. So they're playing like a lot of counter spells in their black, red, white deck, and I mentioned that to them, that if they enjoy playing cards that interact with the stack, they might consider, you know, running blue, since it's the, you know, premier color for doing so. But maybe not. Maybe they're trying to take advantage of it in a deck that you don't expect it in. Maybe that's part of the advantage for them. I don't know. But at any rate, my next opponent is pretty juicy, I guess, and I have one of the juiciest hands you've ever seen. However, my opponent playing Ayali sees Zur, I guess, and decides to concede. So I was quite disappointed, but how do you sequence this? It doesn't quite work. You don't get a turn 1 Zur. So if you run out, because if you run out Watery Grave into Soul Ring into Signet, you can't run the Lotus mana through the Signet. If you could, it would be a turn 1 Zur. But turn 2 Zur, still pretty awesome, and I was definitely looking forward to that. I could do turn 2 Zur without playing the Lotus, and the Lotus would allow me to do a turn 3 or 4 Zur. Like I could have gone Zur into Zur into Zur, and at some point my opponent probably doesn't have removal, and then I attack and win. So that was looking pretty good. But we'll never know. Instead, we'll have to see this game against Motair. And I decide that because although I have these fetches and such, I have drawn in the lock, so my opponent playing Anafenza the Foremost. So it's nice to have something that I'm going second, so it'll probably be removal. If I were going first, it would probably be a counterspell, but it's nice to have that flexibility. Now remember, it's based on the number of cards in my opponent's graveyard, so these fetches will not like power it up or anything. Also, it's not based on the power of the creature, it's based on the converted mana cost of the creature. And for all those reasons, when my opponent plays Dryad Arbor, I'm so happy because it's CMC 0. Boop! So 0 cards in your graveyard, die, Dryad Arbor. I thought that was great. So anyway, but my opponent does get to go Zenith for 1 here, and I can't mental misstep that. However, I'll just get some mana into play, and I leave 2 blue on tap to kind of threaten what I might do. And instead of playing Signet, that's kind of maybe it was sketchy, and I should have just ran the Signet out. But I figured that the next turn was probably going to be a 4-drop anyway, and I could just do this. Might have been wrong, but I wanted to play a little poker, and I get to bounce their 1 casting cost card, and I'm totally tapped out. Opponent Beast Within's my Jace, unfortunately, but I do get to make this card good and deal with their Deathrite. So they plus up a Johnny and pass. I'm going to, of course, attack a Johnny, and now Zur gets to come to the party. And this is kind of why Dark Confidant isn't in the deck right now. It's just because, I love this play that my opponent makes. I never even thought of this. Recruiter the Guard gets a creature with toughness 2 or less. Well, guess who has toughness 2 or less? Serra Ascendant, but only until it hits play. That's a sweet little interaction that I really like. Those guys that tutor for toughness or power, Imperial Recruiter or Recruiter of the Guard, getting Serra Ascendant is phenomenal, actually. I remember Brian and I had made a red-white deck, and I completely missed that interaction, and we absolutely should have played. We had both recruiters in there, and we weren't playing Serra Ascendant, and absolutely should have played it. Anyway, that's something that I'm going to put in the back of my mind, but my opponent uses it to great effect here. Now, I'm going to go get a island here. This is island number 3. And then play a Flooded Strand. Of course, I'm going to attack with Zur and buy some time here. I'm attacking a Johnny, of course. And let's get that Serra Ascendant off the table. I'd like to go get Necro, but I don't want to kill my Zur, and I don't want to take 6 per turn. That takes some pressure off. But my opponent has Reanimate, so they get to Reanimate Recruiter of the Guard, and then Rexage my Sphere, getting their Serra Ascendant back, and then plus it up, make it a 7/7. But I get to fetch a island number 4, Mystic Sanctuary, and put Drown in the Lock back on top. And even though it's a 7/7, it's CMC 1, so die. And now I get to attack and get to do the Necropotence thing. So again, we're attacking a Johnny. Opponent decides to double block, and yeah, I trade their elephant that they gave me for that. And now we're just going to Necro, and that is going to be the end of the game. Of course, I'm going to over Necro by a bit here. I end up taking about 10 cards. And I do find Reliquary Towers, so we'll be holding onto that guy. But let's see what happens here. My opponent was asking if I was recording live or if I was going to just record afterwards, and I mentioned I record afterwards. And the main reason is that I don't like the heavy amounts of delay. So I throw away Thieving Skydiver here because I just don't see that. I probably should have cast it, but who knows if I was going to hold it or not. So I end up throwing it away here because I haven't seen any artifacts for it. It would just be a random 2/1 flyer. Now I'm burning counterspells on things that I might not necessarily counter, and I'm doing it because I have Necropotence in place, so I just want to get more cards out of my hand, at least until I get the Reliquary Tower into play, which I just did. And yeah, we're going to run out Karn. Of course, Karn could have animated like one of my talismans and attacked a Johnny a little bit more easily, but this is fine. So I'm just going to go get a ton of mana into play here. I'm not putting together like the energy field combo, and the reason I'm doing that is because I have Reliquary Towers, so I'm gonna Necro for a bunch, and I just want to have enough mana to be able to do whatever I need to do. I want to be able to play like multiple things, and so as you can see, I just get an incredible hand. There's something about drawing 20 that makes a game easy to win, and keeping them all. Anyways, I counterspell at the end of my opponent's turn, Enlightened Tutor. We're gonna put together Helm combo. Go grab the Helm, brainstorm that into my hand, get rid of a couple of lands that deal damage to me, and then for my turn, down comes the Helm. I'm going to attack, cheat in a Rest in Peace, and activate the Helm. And then that will do it. My opponent's deck, Moltaire's deck. Now, if I'm the opponent, I concede here because I don't like giving away information, but my opponent wants to stick around and show off their deck. Maybe they want the information public. For example, they might be proud of their deck, and I wouldn't blame them. It's a pretty nice build. So very good deck. The only thing that I noticed about it, and taking into account what's already been played, is that I would say that beyond Sylvan Library, and I think I saw Skull Clamp in here, I'm actually not seeing a lot of card draw. I think that's a big mistake here. This deck is too light on card drawing, and you can see how easy it made the game for me that my opponent wasn't able to get more cards into their hand somehow. I say card draw, but hand refill. Also, this is a black deck, and there's no Necropotence. So this is just a huge, you could easily run Dark Confidant. Necropotence would be two major improvements to the deck. Vampiric Tutor would be a huge one. Seal is a huge one. Yawgmoth's Will is a huge one. I don't see Mind Twist. So there's some mega powerful black cards, like game-ending black cards that my opponent's not using, or cards that allow you to get to those cards. And so that would be my one feedback if Moltaire happens to be watching and interested in getting any feedback. So anyway, it was a good game, and we'll move on to the next one, which was against, I think, Moltaire again. Yeah, and then B Wonders. All right, so in this game, and I believe once again my opponent's playing, Anafenza the Foremost. Another little bit tricky of a hand, but I mean, it's first turn preordained. It's just not equipped to deal with fast starts, and unfortunately my opponent has one. But I do find a disenchant and a tutor, so I take the tutor, and luckily my opponent played an Urborg, and then he plays Gaia's Cradle. He couldn't bear to mulligan this hand, even though it's clunky, and I totally understand. But that's been a big punish there. Opponent now has 2 black as their mana, and I've got all my colors, so I'm just going to actually play. I'm going to develop here, so I have time. And I'll go ahead and Trinket into Crypt and Crypt into Signet. It's feeling really good here. Opponent does duress the Vampiric Tutor out of my hand, which was pretty important because I was going to put together a combo that would just win the game. I was going to go ahead and go get Commit to Memory, actually, but as it turns out, so I was planning, I run out Zur, and I'm going to copy the Greaves here and equip Zur. Opponent dismembers in response, so I decided, you know what, I still want the Greaves, so I'll copy the Greaves and hit him with the Trinket Mage just because of cards like Sylvan Library, which I do know is in his deck now, and then the opponent just plays Tarmogoyf and bashes me, so maybe I shouldn't have attacked there, but I don't think I would have chump blocked anyway, so it was fine. All right, so my turn, I'm going to run out Grim. I was trying to see if there was a way I could do this and get a Hull Breacher into the mix as well, but there really wasn't a great way to do it. There wasn't a great way to do it, including my commander, so I end up just going this route. I'm going to wait on the commander. I know I have Commander Greaves, but being able to do Urza, Hull Breacher, and still have a remand up seemed better. Opponent runs Caddic Teague, so I'm going to have to remand that back, and I find Commit to Memory. And my opponent then plays a Sylvan, and look at that Hull Breacher sitting in play. It looked like a complete garbage card, and now it looks like a superstar. And it is. I'm going to make a mistake here because that counterspell is not going to stay in my hand. My opponent makes a mistake and actually activates Sylvan and gives me 2 treasures. Then they play Anafenza, and this was the mistake. I have 2 counters effectively. I should have just counterspelled Anafenza with an actual counter and then used the Tuck ability and probably tucked either the Llanowar Elves or the Lightning Greaves. But I don't, and that's the only play my opponent has. I was thinking I wanted to counter I thought they would be able to play Gaddock Teague and then I would counter that and then Commit to Memory, but they actually don't. So I end up wasting an opportunity to counter something. So instead I untap Grim Monolith and then use the mana to tuck Finhorn Elves so they have no mana in play. That way this turn there's nothing they can do at all. Play a land pre-twist, and I get to pull the combo off. Memory, Hull Breacher, and look at that. My opponent has no cards in hand, and I just drew. Look how many treasures. And with Urza, these are all Mox Sapphires. So, yeah, we're doing okay. And I'm going to Hull Breacher and put a Brainstorm on the stack, and then with the Hull Breacher's effect on the stack, that way I can get rid of 2 cards that I don't want and replace them with real cards. And at this point, my opponent gives up, obviously that is the correct thing to do. Of course, if they don't, I'm probably just going to go get Fragmentize and Fragmentize their boots, and then deluge their board most likely, but maybe not. Take a look though. That construct is a 16-16, so I was actually thinking about. Oh, and don't forget, Tarmogoyf also lost power and toughness once the Time Twister went off. So I was thinking about whether or not I wanted to. I was probably just gonna. I might have just gotten a counter of some sort, beat my opponent's face in with the construct, forcing them to chump block very quickly, and then from there I can use counters to just hold the line, smash, smash, win type of deal. So anyway, but my opponent has had enough and concedes. And finally, we end up with the game against B-Wonders. And that was really cool. It was gratifying when you... I've had a game now where I've used all of the tech cards that I've added to the deck, like you've seen come into play. The Get Probe, like, found... gave me information about my opponent's hand, and then on the turn after I Gitaxian probed, I found the land I needed. So it was two cards down, and it got me, there while giving me information. The mental misstep, of course, was useful earlier. We saw the Drown in the Lock being very valuable to the point that I used it multiple times, and even the Commit to Memory here. The only card we haven't seen me use is Dromer's Charm. So it's also the card that I'm still unsure of. But anyway, this opponent, B-Wonders, is playing... Sakashima of 1,000 Faces and Timna the Weaver. So my opponent is playing an Esper deck. We are going to battle for Esper deck supremacy. I go ahead and sneak out a Mox Opal on the off chance that my opponent does something crazy with Time Twister. I just want it in play. Instead, they run out Hushbringer and Divining Witch. And I'm concerned that Divining Witch symbolizes that they're running Labman combo. So I just stall for time here. I don't have a solution to it, but at least I can buy some time and hopefully find an answer. So I don't have anything too great. There is a Swords to Plowshares there, but I realized that I could be panicking and over-panicking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run Zur out and sit on Muddle the Mixture to protect Zur from whatever my opponent might be doing. And as long as they don't go something along the lines of Blue Source, the 2 casting cost combo Merfolk, and then activate Divining Wish for Abandon Hope, right? Or whatever. As long as they don't do that sequence, I'm better off sitting with the Muddle because all I need is a turn and then Zur can take over the game. And so I decide, and I also remember I do have Swords of Plowshares here on top of my library. But if they were to run out that 2 casting cost creature, what I can do is I can also tap the top and then plow this in response to the creature. But the problem is they can use it in response to that, and their deck's still exiled, and they still win the game. So it actually isn't. It is no solution. So, but if the card that they're getting is like Labman or something, Labman, Ancient Tomb, do your thing, then I might be okay. So I know that I'm really weak to that combo card, but I mean they haven't tutored much, and Zur. The ability for me to just win the game here is too tempting, and instead my opponent Time Twisters and runs out Siren Storm Tamer. So I take a peek with top, and that hits, and that's going to protect their guys if I let my own opponent untap with blue mana. So what I'm going to do is actually get into their mana a little bit, and I am going to fetch a Sphere here. And so I plus Teferi because I don't care about bouncing one of their creatures and then losing my Teferi. I want to have immunity to them. I don't want them to be able to play Fast Effects. So opponent then tries an Opposition Agent, which I counter, attacks Teferi down to 3. And then from there, we're in great shape. I'm just going to put together the Helm attack. I use Fabricate to get Helm. I attack, I get Rest in Peace, and I exile. So obviously there were a lot of things that I could have done here. I could have like Spellseekered for Mind Twist, plus Teferi, Mind Twist them during their draw step, that kind of thing. But if you can just win the game, just win the game, right? And then my opponent's deck I thought was so interesting because I actually ended up, this is what my opponent actually ended up exiling B-Wonders. And they're playing like all these different, I mean, look how many, the idea was, what do you do against cards like Opposition Agent? Obviously, I had a solution this game, but look at all these cards that Vryn Wingmare and Sanctum Prelate and Aven Mind Sensor, Eidolon of Rhetoric, Elish Norn, obviously if they cheat it into play, Hushwing Griff, Archon of Emeria, Rule of Law, Linval. Like, this is attempting to be a prison deck. Now, I don't. Once again, this isn't. This is missing some key cards, and it's a little light on. It's a little light on actual card draw. Also, like, I don't know what it is with people playing black and not playing Mind Twist, but that's just wrong. Like, it doesn't matter what casting cost you're playing the Mind Twist for, as long as it's bigger than 0, it's a really good card, and you should play it. So, but yeah, interesting deck. So I ended up facing a deck that had all of the threats, and I did fine this time. But of course, there was this situation right here where I don't know what my opponent was holding, but they certainly, if they had that Merfolk, the I win button, they could have just killed me and won the game right on the spot, which is kind of frustrating. But luckily it all worked out. So hopefully you enjoyed those games and you got to see the tech cards, and I'll be interested in what you think about it. Divining Witch is a card that I didn't realize that there was another combo card for that sort of effect. Win the game. Where is it? There it is. Thassa's Oracle. I didn't realize there was another combo card for Thassa's Oracle and Labman and such and Jace. That's actually really interesting. So I suppose, so this Gideon of Trials is a card that I could run. You can play it and immediately get an emblem, and it takes combo decks. It forces combo decks to actually deal with Gideon of the Trials because they can't win until they do. And I suppose that's an option for me. If I would rather play that, like if I want to, say, add that to the deck as some sort of silver bullet against combo decks, but I don't prefer that too much. I like the card okay. Preventing damage a permanent would deal is pretty powerful if they've got like equipment on something. The card's pretty good actually, but it's not great in an empty board state. It doesn't generate card advantage unless it can attack a planeswalker. 4 damage per turn in a 40 life format is a 10 turn clock. This is the equivalent of a grizzly bear. So in a regular deck, so it's not enough pressure to care all that much. And so outside of like the situations where it is good, it isn't good. And I can contrast that to just running another card that's like a counterspell. Counterspells, as long as you have the mana, counterspell's basically always good. So I think I won't be playing Gideon of the Trials, but it is an interesting card to keep in mind. And if combo becomes frustrating enough, that might be a card that I could run. But there are some other things I'd be looking at first before I went sort of that deep on trying to solve the problem. But certainly, like I said, certainly something to keep in mind. So anyway, but for now, that's all I have. Welcome to 2021. I hope you're having as much fun as possible and that the year goes well for all of us. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.